My name is Rev.Andy Carlson, and I am very grateful to be one of your new associate ministers. Reverend Darlene announced Reverend Laura Collins and myself as associate ministers last week, and I am so humbled and so grateful. After I retired from the military, my wife Lauren and I traveled the country for almost 11 months looking for a place where we wanted to live. And we traveled over 40,000 miles, and we hit all four corners of the country. We started in Washington, D.C., and went up to Maine, and we went across the northern states and ended up in Washington, and then down the coast in California and Arizona and across the bottom to Florida. And then about this time last year, we started working our way up from Florida, and we ended up here. We were in a campsite over here in Forest City for maybe 4 or 5 weeks. And we came here because it's a unity church. You know, over the course of our travels, every Sunday that we were near a unity church, we went. So we saw all different types of unity churches. There's a saying that I've heard that if you've been to one unity church, you've been to one unity church. Because they're all different. So we saw all types and all varieties. And when home. So even though we were in a campsite, living in a 21-foot trailer, this church made us say, this is home. And we started to look for a home, a house, because of this church. It's one of the things that really touched me, and it continues to touch me every service, is when it's made clear that the reason why we show up at church is to heal our case of mistaken identity. What a powerful and transformative mission to heal our case of mistaken identity. So just in case any of you are confused about my identity, I am not Reverend Darlene. Please don't make that mistake. So, you know, Reverend Darlene announced Reverend Laura and myself last week, and then she threw me into the deep water and said, "How would you like to speak next Sunday?" So here I am, treading water. She suggested that I tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm going to share some personal stories that will hopefully help you get to know a little bit about me, but possibly shed a light on that mistaken identity so that we can see the difference between the small m me and the capital big M me. You know, stories are such a great way to communicate, so I'm going to share with you a true story. And the names have not been changed because we are all innocent. So, October 7th, 2010. My adventure began with a trip to the emergency room, spa, and weight loss center. First of all, it was fabulous. There was no reservation required. I showed up and they had a room for me. When I came in, they asked me how I was feeling. I thought that was very gracious of them. And then they gave me some nitroglycerin. Shaken, not stirred, is very yummy. Not at all. And then they didn't even ask for my credit card information as I was being admitted, and I thought that was very trusting of them. And then they went and saved my life. How about that? They gave me a private room filled with a tower of electronic gear that, try as I might, I couldn't get it to play any music or TV shows, but it was beeping and squawking the whole time I was there. And then they went and waited on me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 12 days. My daily activities included a luxurious sponge bath. Ooh. And 3 3 meals of hospital food. That's the weight loss part. And there were kind nurses, and I had many loving visitors. I must say that even though this emergency room spa and weight loss center gets 5 stars as a hospital, I do not recommend it as a vacation destination. So that Thursday night back in October of 2010, I was on a first date. It was before I met Lauren. She knows about this story, so I'm not revealing any secrets. I was on a first date, and this woman had a penchant for things trendy and expensive. So we went to downtown Washington, D.C., to the Georgetown district, which is trendy and expensive. And we were having a lovely Italian meal at this place called Piccolino's. And we were on the balcony overlooking Georgetown, lovely view. And she turned to me and said, "Andy, are you okay?" I said, "I'm fine," having no clue why she was asking me that. And we continued to talk. First date, we're talking about trivial stuff. Where are you from? What do you do? Turns out she was an orthodontist. And she had a father who had had a heart attack and had to have bypass surgery. So we continued to talk. And she said, "Andy, are you okay?" I said, "I'm fine." I'm very curious why she keeps asking me this question. Well, we finish up our Italian meal and we decide to go down the street to another restaurant and have dessert and coffee. So while we're there, we order dessert and coffee and we're chit-chatting. She says, "Andy, are you sure you're okay?" I'm really baffled at this point. "Yeah, I'm fine." So a few minutes later, I don't know what she's seeing, but she says, "Andy, what are you feeling?" She changed the question. I couldn't just say, "I'm fine." I had to actually think. And I noticed at that time I was feeling a tightness right here, like a cramp. And I'm telling her this, and she says, "Andy, I think we need to go to the hospital." "No, I'm fine, I'm fine." And just about that time, I felt this swish across my lower back of warmth. It wasn't pain, but it was just a swish of warmth. And I told her that, and she says, "Andy, we're going to the hospital." And I agreed. So we paid for our desserts and coffee and walked downstairs. And if any of you have visited a big city like New York or Washington, D.C., it's almost impossible to find a taxi cab. And there, just outside the restaurant, was a taxi cab parked, waiting for us. We got in, and she said, "George Washington emergency room." The taxi cab driver did a hard U-turn, and we were there in a matter of minutes because it was only 7 blocks away. She walks us in, and I sit down, and the nurse says, "We'll get to you as soon as we can." And this woman, God bless her, said, "No, this man is having a heart attack." She said, the nurse said, "We'll get to you when we can." And she started banging her fist saying, "This man is having a heart attack. You need to see him right now." And she would not relent until they took me into a back room. And the young intern who was on duty that night came in and gave me a dose of nitroglycerin, which is it's what you do with a heart attack. Give a nitroglycerin and then ask, "Is there anything different?" There wasn't. So they give you a second one. Still no difference. And then a third and final one. Still no difference. She was at a loss to what to do, so she called upstairs to the heart surgeon on duty, and apparently he came down and had a conversation with me. I don't remember anything at all past the nitroglycerin. But apparently I talked to the doctor, and I told him that I had a pain between my shoulder blades. And that is a very clear diagnostic indicator of aortic dissection. Where your aorta coming out of your heart is starting to disintegrate. So he told me to call somebody, and apparently I called my mom. I don't remember it. So I called, and my stepfather, Jerry, answered, and he almost hung up thinking it was a crank call because it did not sound like me. But he handed me over to my mom, and I said, "Mom, I'm about to go into surgery, and I can't tell you that it's not serious." Click. Imagine my poor mother. She has enough information to be incredibly worried and nothing else. Anyway, they put me into a CAT scan, saw what was going on, realized that yes, indeed, it was an aortic dissection, immediately took me to the operating room and operated on me for the next 9.5 hours. I was in the ICU the next day on Friday, and I was not responding. I was slow to come out of the anesthesia, and the doctor was worried. By this time, my father and my brother had arrived from Chicago, and they were worried about me as well because I was not responding. Later that evening, my daughters showed up, and their voices, I think, is what brought me out of this sort of anesthetic stupor, and just enough to give a sort of a weak smile and a thumbs up, and everybody's mind was put at ease because they saw I was coming out of it a little bit. The next few days were a blur. I know my dad and my brother were there, and my daughters were at the hospital. I know some people came to visit. I can't remember who. I know some came more than once. I don't remember that. But I am forever grateful for these people who showed up and helped me and my family out in this time of need. However, when people started calling it a tragedy, describing it as horrific or terrible or awful, I could not wrap my mind around those descriptors because I had already started to see this as the blessing that it was. Blessing from the beginning to the end. So hang on to that blessing because I'm going to pause. You can tell I'm not Reverend Darlene because I'm, sports here. Time out. So we're going to go on a tangential story that's related. But before we go, I want to ask, how does it feel to have a man up in front being vulnerable? Is it kind of weird? Okay. Because I can't be anything but vulnerable at this point. Yeah. Those other days are gone. So the tangential story is about shame. And shame has been a huge part of my life. The feeling that I was not good enough, that I was somehow wrong, not worthy of love, not capable of loving others. That's been the core of every thought, word, and deed for most of my life. It's impacted every decision I've made, where I went to school, my job, even relationships. At my former home church of Community on the Hill in Washington, D.C., there was a very patient and generous young man named Peter who would ask me on occasion, "Andy, there's a men's workshop coming up. I think it might be good for you." And I'd look at my calendar. "No, I'm busy. I got something going that day." "No, I can't really afford it." No. Well, he kept asking. And finally, one day when he asked, I had this visceral reaction in my gut that said, "You have to say yes, or else. Or else." So I did say yes. And before I went to the weekend, I was given very explicit instructions that we were to arrive on a Friday evening between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. Now, I carpooled with a man who I didn't know, and he was a talker. And he talked and talked and talked and missed the turn. So I'm looking at my watch saying 4 and 5, 4 and 5, and we got there about 4:50. So we were there on time, but I was sweating bullets. We got checked in, we put our stuff down, and we were taken to a very small room. It was actually a stairwell. And we were told to wait. And there were all these other men there waiting. They had gotten there closer to 4 o'clock. So some were sitting on the stairs, some were sitting on the ground, some were leaning up against the wall, all waiting. Nobody knew each other, so nobody was really talking. And we waited. 5 o'clock came, and we waited. And we waited. And we waited some more. People started talking, like, what's going on? How come we're waiting? Finally, 6 o'clock came around, and somebody came in and led the whole group into a large room and asked us to sit on the floor with our legs crossed, sort of yoga style, and we waited a little bit, some more. Then the leader came out, and he was standing in the front like I'm standing, and imagine the men sitting in a circle back there, and he introduced himself and welcomed us to the weekend. And then he asked, who was the first man to arrive? And a man sitting over here raised his hand. And the leader asked him to stand up and tell us his name and a little bit about himself. He was from Maryland, and he was 74 years old, and he had gotten here about 4:05 p.m. And then the leader asked, who arrived last? Nobody raised their hand. Who arrived last? Finally, a hand kind of went up like this. And the leader had the man stand up, and he introduced himself. He was a 29-year-old man from West Virginia. And the leader asked, what time did you get here? 5:45. What time were you supposed to get here? I don't know. Well, you were given instructions to get here between 4 and 5 p.m. And you got here at 5:45 p.m. What did you do instead? Oh, I was hungry, so I stopped and I got a burger and fries and a Coke. I didn't know what the food was like, so I got some food. And then the leader went through a process to help this man understand accountability. That was the purpose of this whole first meeting, was accountability. He helped this young man realize that by showing up at 5:45 that he had made this man who arrived at 4:05 wait for a whole extra hour. Not only from 4 to 5, but from 5 to 6. He had the man had them talk to each other, and they worked it out. The younger man said, I'm sorry, I realize the impact that I've had on you. I realize the impact I've had on the circle as a whole, because we've all had to wait for me. It was a profound learning for that young man. And it was also a profound learning for me. Because while I was sitting there, watching this interchange between the man who arrived on time, followed the rules, was patient and kind, and the younger man who was impetuous and didn't follow the rules, and how they came to an agreement, I realized that I personally had not lived my life in integrity. I had not been accountable to my family, to my job, to my education, to my career, to myself. It was like an arrow struck me in the heart. Well, we went through the rest of the evening, and then we were taken to our sleeping quarters. It was bunk bed style. This was a no-frills workshop, I'm hoping you see. I didn't sleep at all that night. I was in a room with 5 other men, 3 of whom snored like chainsaws. So if you have a partner who snores, God bless you. But it wasn't the snoring that kept me awake. It was this penetrating clarity that for most of my life, a good portion of my life, had been unlived. I was filled with shame, a deep, debilitating shame. So there's a shame researcher out there that maybe you've heard of, Brené Brown. She's an awesome presenter. She's got a couple of TED Talks that I highly recommend. She also has a book, I think it's called Daring Greatly, and just wonderful teaching. So she speaks of shame like this. Shame says, you're not good enough. You're not good enough. And if for some reason, somehow you get past that belief, shame sucker punches you and says, I need to get over here. Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? So it's either I'm not good enough or who am I? You know, in the first service, it brought to mind the quote that is so famous that Marianne Williams said, if we're not afraid of our smallness, we're afraid of how big we are. And who are we to stay small rather than big? And for me, it was shame that said, who do you think you are, that made me play small? Made me play small. So if you draw a circle on the ground, which I'm not going to do here because there's a very nice carpet, so I'm going to use this hula hoop as that circle. Inside this circle is everything that you deem as important and as valuable. It's your relationship, it's your health, it's your prosperity, it's your family, it's whatever. It's your relationship with God. Now, put it on the ground. I'm not sure if you can see this back there. But within that is everything that is important. Now, we have the opportunity to dance around it, or we can sort of test it out, put a foot in, sort of like you put your left foot in, you put your left foot out, you put your left foot in, and shake it all about, or jump in with both feet. You can jump in with both feet. And that's what I call wholeheartedness. To be wholehearted is to jump in with both feet. So obviously, I'm talking about shame. So much of my life I have been a dance around the circle, or maybe just a toe in every so often, kind of like Woody Allen's quote, why would I want to be a member of a club that would have me as a member? It is funny. It is funny. So that's what kept me from jumping with both feet in, because why would I want to go in there so that people could see me as the fraud that I thought I was? At the core of wholeheartedness is the belief that we are worthy now. We are worthy now. We are worthy when? It's not we are worthy if I do this, if I study that, if I go to that teacher, or if I change my life. Or it's not I am worthy when I do this or when I do that. We are worthy now, right here, right now, just as we are. Not if, not when, now as we are. Living life with both feet in means we trust God. We trust God and make ourselves vulnerable to God's vision of us as being worthy of love and belonging right now. That's a wonderful word, belonging. Belonging. Feel the power of that. I belong here. This is my home. We belong here. We are the divine children of God. Vulnerability is absolutely essential to wholehearted living. Vulnerability is not a weakness. Let me say that again. Vulnerability is not a weakness. I'm sure there are people that think that it is. But being vulnerable means to let ourselves be deeply seen. We open up and allow ourselves to be seen, to love with our whole hearts, and to practice gratitude and joy in times of peace and happiness, but also in times of turmoil and fear. We know that we are enough. Living life in this way takes courage. The word courage comes from the Latin root cor, C-O-R. Cor means heart. So listen to this. The original definition of courage is to tell the story of who you are with your whole heart. That's courage. Tell the story of who you are with your whole heart. People who have courage to be vulnerable have compassion to be kind to themselves first, so that then they can turn and be kind and compassionate to someone else. Because we know that if you can't love yourself, you can't love someone else. If you can't be kind to yourself, you can't be kind to someone else. People who have courage live life with authenticity. And what that means is they're willing to let go of who they think they should be to living life as they really are. There's a funny expression that I heard, stop shoulding on yourself. I should do this, I should do that, when we are worthy right now, just as we are, authentically ourselves. And without authenticity, there can be no real connection to oneself, to others, or to God. So, I mentioned that we're going to come back full circle to the blessings of my hospital stay. The first blessing is that I remembered to care for myself, which has not always been the case. I cared for myself enough to get to the hospital, and I imagine some of you are remembering the story. Andy, it wasn't you who took yourself to the hospital. It was that woman named Roxana, that angel of God, who said, Andy, you are going to the hospital. That's very true. But who was it that said, yes, I agree, let's go? That was me. So that was me taking care of myself in the moment. The fact that we got to the hospital so quickly is what allowed the doctors a chance to save my life. Aortic dissection, it's a minuscule number of people that survive that condition. And fortunately, I'm one of them. Another blessing was that I awoke with a feeling of expansiveness and true knowing that God is all, and everyone and everything is one with God. God is all, and we're all one with God. The peace and serenity of this knowing is at a cellular level in my being, and there is no doubt in my mind that this is true. The outpouring of love and compassion from my community. It was Community on the Hill. It was my seminary class from New York City. It was my men's group. It was my friends. It was my family. It was my neighbors. And it was awesome. That love changed my life. It allowed me to realize that all this love being expressed from them to me was actually love that was already within me, and I mirrored it back to them. And the love that I expressed to them was already within them, and I was just mirroring it back to them. We were mirroring each other. This is a prime example of the law of giving and receiving. The energetic flow back and forth. In order to give, I need to receive the love from those people who came to care for me. In order to receive, for them to receive, they needed to give it to me. So it was this back and forth, this mirroring. It was amazing. And it was that made me realize that I am lovable. And I am capable of loving. The end result was that finally this loud, insane voice that resides in the back of my mind for as long as I can remember, that would relentlessly say, "You're not good enough, you don't matter, how dare you, who do you think you are?" Said it over and over and over again, was finally quieted. It finally let go. And when it does come back, all I have to do is go, shh. Since that October, I feel in my heart a self-love that I have never felt before. A Course in Miracles says, and I wholeheartedly agree, that the holiest of all spots on earth is where an ancient hatred becomes a present love. The holiest spot on this earth is where an ancient hatred becomes a present love. In this case, the ancient hatred was my self-loathing. And the present love was when this love had been expressed to me by so many and so powerfully that the ancient hatred became a present love. So now, to the answer to the question of who do you think you are, it's no longer I'm nobody, I'm not good enough, I'm unlovable. It's now I am a son of God, loved and accepted as I am. Another blessing was a newfound ability to surrender. It's a childlike vulnerability that allowed me to let nurses slide a bedpan under me and wipe my backside. It was a surrender that allowed me to let my mom come and help out for 2.5 weeks after I got released home, and allowed her to carry things for me because I wasn't able to lift more than 5 pounds. Allowed her to cook and clean, and believe me, the house needed cleaning. And I even allowed her to slip her hand around the shower curtain and scrub my back because I couldn't reach it. It was a divine gift. It was a healing between my mother and me. It was wonderful. It allowed my daughters to come and share with me how they felt about me after being frightened that I would not be around, that I had sung my last song. When the anesthesia eventually wore off and I had enough stamina to read, I randomly opened up my Course in Miracles book just like this. And this is what I opened to. And what I read very nicely expressed the expansiveness that I shared with you earlier in the talk. This an expansiveness and the true knowing that God is all, and we are all one. Now, in Course terminology, Son of God means the indwelling Christ, in unity speak. And the Father in the Course is like the one power, one presence that we talk about at the beginning of the service. So I will include both. Shut your eyes if you feel compelled to do so. Beyond the body, beyond the sun and stars, past everything you see and yet somehow familiar, is an arc of golden light that stretches as you look into a great and shining circle. And all the circle fills with light before your eyes. The edges of the circle disappear, and what is in it is no longer contained at all. The light expands and covers everything, extending to infinity, forever shining, with no break or limit and rear. Within it, everything is joined in perfect continuity. Nor is it possible to imagine that anything could be outside, for there is nowhere that this light is not. This is the vision of the Son of God, the indwelling Christ, whom you know well. Here is the sight of him who knows his Father, the one power and one presence. Here is the memory of who you are. Here is the memory of who you are. Richard and Kat. I am, you are, we are the light of the world. That is our only function. That is why we are here. The light we shine is love. Love is who we are, and it is how we interact with the oneness of all things. It is only through allowing ourselves to be deeply seen, to embrace life with our whole hearts, to practice gratitude and joy that we can be who we are, the creation of God, love. Now I know I am enough. I know you are enough. I invite you, be vulnerable and let love flow through you as you, and allow you to shine your loving light on all. Amen.